Welcome back to another chapter in our Unlikely Friendships for Sleep series, a soothing blend of imagination and history, where you're not just learning about legends, you're living beside them as their lifelong best friend. Tonight we're returning to the story of your unlikely friendship with Princess Diana. Through quiet walks and whispered calls, discover the woman behind the headlines, who laughed freely, hurt quietly, and found herself not in royalty, but in the freedom that followed. If these stories bring peace to your night, a small click on like and subscribe means the world to us, and helps us keep creating more. And tell us in the comments where and when you're listening from. We love hearing from our growing circle of dreamers each night. Now, let the stars settle overhead, and let the noise of the world fade as you fall asleep to one of your most unlikely friendships, the kind that never happened until now. Chapter 1. The Girl in the Greenhouse. It was the spring of 1977, and you were lost in a hedge maze the size of a small country. You weren't even supposed to be there, just a friend of a friend tagging along to a Spencer family garden party. The kind with champagne flutes balanced too perfectly, canapes you couldn't pronounce, and conversations that felt more like interviews. People posed as they spoke, adjusting their cuffs more than their opinions. You'd slipped away looking for air, shoes in hand, past marble statues and manicured lawns. That's when you found it, an iron gate, half open, nearly swallowed by ivy. You ducked inside and entered a world the estate had forgotten. There were no gardeners here, just overgrown hedges, tangled roots, and the skeletal remains of a glass house in the distance. The kind of place time got stuck. And that's where you saw her. She was kneeling in the dirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, humming a Barry Manilow song under her breath. One boot kicked off, the other loosely laced. Her fingers were halfway inside a cracked terracotta pot, coaxing something green into position with the care of a surgeon and the stubbornness of a teenager. There was a smudge of soil across her cheek and not a single trace of ceremony in her posture. You stood frozen, watching. She didn't look up. "Unless you've got tips on charming aphids," she said, "I'm all set." You apologized. She didn't respond right away. Then, as if remembering the presence of a second person, she added, "It's the only place I don't have to pretend." That was your first exchange, brief, brittle, honest, and unforgettable. She was 16, though she looked older when she was thinking, and much younger when she smiled. That day she didn't smile, not yet. Her nails were stained with dirt, her knees were patched with grass, and her eyes were sharp in a way that said she'd already learned to scan a room before entering. You asked what she was planting. "Runaways," she said flatly. Then with the hint of a grin, "They're begonias, really, but don't tell them that." You laughed. She didn't. Not right away. But later, when a worm wriggled out from under the mulch and startled her, she let out a surprised yelp. You laughed again, and this time she joined you. Just briefly. Just enough. You spent the rest of the afternoon inside that greenhouse like old friends pretending to be strangers. Light filtered through fractured glass, casting fractured shadows over pots and petals. She handed you a trowel without asking. You started helping. You didn't talk about school or family names. You talked about mixtapes, about her guinea pig, Peanuts, who she swore had more emotional intelligence than half the House of Lords, about her favourite tree, an elm she'd named after David Bowie. "I think it listens when I cry," she said. "Better than most people." You asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. She said, A ballerina, or a children's book illustrator, or maybe a spy. Then after a beat, but not a princess. God, no, that would be the worst. You raised an eyebrow. She caught it. Don't look at me like that, she said. I've seen what it does to people. Later you walked the perimeter of the estate together, keeping to the shadows, ducking behind hedges when guests passed by in pastel hats. She showed you the kitchen stairs where she'd eavesdrop on staff gossip, and the window alcove that caught the morning sun just right. She had a diary hidden in a biscuit tin, a Walkman loaded with bootleg tapes from an older cousin in London. She had secrets, not dangerous ones, just unshared ones. I like songs that feel like they're keeping a secret, she told you. Same with people. She wasn't trying to impress you. She wasn't trying at all. That's what made it stick. Over the next few weeks, you returned to Althorpe, first by invitation, then by quiet routine. The greenhouse became your meeting place. She taught you how to repot orchids and how to steal scones from the main kitchen without alerting the footman. You helped her name every goat in the paddock, including one who looked suspiciously like Prince Philip. You saw her lose her temper once, when someone at brunch called her Lady Di in a tone that sounded like ownership. You saw her cry once too, barely, after a terse phone call with her father. She hid the tears behind her sleeve, pretending to clean her hands. But mostly she radiated this restless joy. Not the loud kind. The kind that sneaks up on you when you finally feel safe. The kind that leaks out in sideways grins and garden soil under fingernails. She let you read one of her poems. You didn't know what to say, so you just said it was beautiful. She rolled her eyes, but you caught the lip twitch. A half smile she didn't mean to show. There was one day, late July, when the greenhouse roof cracked in a summer storm. Rain trickled through the beams, landing on your hair and her shoulders. She didn't run. She tilted her head back and laughed. "This is what freedom feels like," she said, arms wide, soaking wet. Then August came. Her departure hung like a thundercloud. She was leaving for finishing school in Switzerland, a place she referred to as a boarding house with better silverware. It wasn't her choice. None of it was. You could see it in the way she packed, slowly, without urgency, like folding her life away in pieces. The day before she left, she handed you a Polaroid. The two of you sitting on the low stone wall by the orchard, legs dangling, both wearing ridiculous sunglasses and holding melting ice lollies. On the back she'd written, "For when the real world gets too real." You walked her to the car the next morning in silence. Her trunk was already packed. The driver checked his watch. She turned to you, hugged you, not tight, not long, but in that way that says, "Remember this part of me." Then she whispered, "Promise me something. Anything. If I come back changed, remind me who I was in the greenhouse." You nodded, and somehow, through every year, every headline, every twist of fate, you kept that promise. The world would meet Diana years later in pearls and posture, waving beside a prince. They'd watch her on magazine covers, analyze her every outfit, assign meaning to every frown. But you knew her before any of that, before the gowns, before the heartbreak, before the fairy tale became a fortress. She was just Di, and you were the one who saw her first, barefoot in the greenhouse, planting begonias she called runaways, hoping no one would notice she was one too. Chapter 2. Behind the Balcony Smile. 1980 to 1981. Courtship, engagement, and the royal wedding. It started with a phone call. Her voice was low, uncertain. "I've been invited to Balmoral," she said. You were sitting on the floor of your flat, sorting through a laundry pile that looked like it had formed its own civilization. Her voice wasn't excited, it wasn't even nervous. It sounded like someone describing a ghost sighting, part awe, part warning. "It's not a date if his entire family's there, is it?" she added. "Feels more like an audition." She didn't say his name. She didn't need to. "Charles. You knew the basics. Everyone did. He was the bachelor prince, the future king, the man who had dated actresses, aristocrats, and was, as the papers like to say, still seeking a suitable match. But to Diana he wasn't a fairy tale. He was a stranger with a title and a habit of showing up at family events with a clipboard of expectations. "What do I even wear?" she asked. "Something that confuses the corgis," you said. "Maybe pearls and a poncho." She laughed. Barely. The Balmoral visit came and went like fog. When she returned, she came straight to your flat, kicked off her shoes, collapsed onto your sofa, and exhaled like she'd held her breath for 48 hours. "They're polite," she said, "but polite like cutlery, polished, cold." She told you about the Queen, who had been cordial but distant, Prince Philip, who talked about fishing as though it were a religion, and Charles. "He asked if I liked Wagner," she said. "I thought he meant the paint store." Still, the invitations kept coming. Garden walks, opera boxes, carefully orchestrated photo ops where the lighting was always just right, and her answers had to be too. "He likes that I'm quiet," she said, "but I'm only quiet because I never get a word in." Then came the ring. It happened in February 1981, in the nursery lounge of all places, surrounded by toddler paintings and toy blocks. Charles had arrived with a sapphire ring and a question that felt less like a leap of love and more like a box being ticked. She said yes. Then she called you. "I think I've made a very polite mistake," she whispered. You could hear the children playing in the background, the clink of juice glasses, the sound of a life she would no longer get to live. The announcement broke the news cycle. One day she was Shy D, the kindergarten assistant. The next, she was the bride of the future king. The press lost its mind. Photographers lined her street. Journalists asked what shampoo she used. One paper ran a 3-page spread on her eyebrows. They published her class photo, her school reports, her shoe size, her blood type. The balcony smile was born before the wedding even happened. "It's like I've been wrapped in cellophane," she said. "Everyone can see me, but no one asks if I can breathe." You watched the famous engagement interview on television, the moment they were asked if they were in love. She smiled and said, "Of course." Charles replied with a smirk, "Whatever in love means." You wanted to throw something at the screen. She came to you that night still in her engagement dress. No coat, no entourage, just Diana. Her cheeks were streaked with tears and her shoes were scuffed from walking too fast. She curled beside you on the couch and didn't speak for 10 minutes. Then finally, "I feel like I've been gift-wrapped and handed off." The palace spun the narrative. They called it a modern match, a royal fairy tale. They said she had grace, dignity, princess potential. But no one asked if she had questions, if she had fears. You were there for all of it. The endless fittings, the speech lessons, the etiquette drills. One day she collapsed into a chair and said, "I'm being trained like a pet." You kept her grounded, reminded her of the greenhouse, of the girl who once danced barefoot in puddles and named begonias after David Bowie lyrics. As the wedding neared, the pressure crescendoed. Courtiers hovered, press leaks multiplied, designers scrambled to manage her gown, which ballooned with taffeta and symbolism. "Why is it so big?" you asked once. She winked. "To remind them how small I feel inside." The night before the wedding, she didn't sleep. Neither did you. You stayed up in her Kensington sitting room, watching Casablanca on mute and eating toast with jam directly from the jar. She was half laughing, half crying. "I don't want to be a spectacle," she said. "I want to be enough." On the morning of July 29th, 1981, the world watched as she stepped into St. Paul's Cathedral in a dress with a 25-foot train and a veil so sheer it looked like mist. You stood behind a pillar hidden from the crowd. Her hands trembled. "I wish it were just a man," she whispered, "not a monarchy." The world watched and watched. An estimated 750 million people across 74 countries. They called her radiant, graceful, the second coming of Grace Kelly, a commoner marrying a prince, a new Diana era. But you knew she walked down that aisle with 1,000 invisible strings attached. She skipped the word obey in her vows, a silent act of rebellion, a crack in the glass. The kiss on the balcony was rehearsed and yet somehow fragile. She smiled, always smiled, but afterward, in the silence of Buckingham's West Wing, she found you. Her gown was still on, her shoes were off. She looked like someone who had just outrun a wave and wasn't sure if it was still chasing her. "I did it," she whispered, "but I don't know what I did." You said, "You survived it." She nodded, then sat on the edge of a velvet bench, the tiara digging into her scalp, and let her voice break. "I don't think I belong here." You didn't try to convince her otherwise. Later that night, while the rest of the world celebrated, you shared toast in silence. She stared out the palace window at the endless fields of people, candles and confetti. And she whispered what you had feared she'd say since Balmoral. "They didn't want me," she said. "They wanted the idea of me." You didn't disagree. The world would remember that wedding as magical. The dress, the procession, the balcony, the spectacle. But you would always remember the girl behind it. The one who asked whether she'd vanish. The one who felt like a guest at her own coronation. And long after the cheers faded, long after the headlines changed, the memory of that night, barefoot, mascara smudged, holding toast like a lifeline, would be the one that stayed. Chapter 3, The Palace Walls, 1981 to 1982. Early marriage, protocol and isolation. The palace had a smell, not a bad one, just distinct. Polished wood, freshly pressed linen, a trace of lavender as if even the air had to follow protocol. You noticed it the first time you visited her at Kensington. She opened the door barefoot, holding a mug of cold tea. "They told me someone would come help unpack," she said. "Turns out someone was me." Inside, the walls were tall and the windows taller. The curtains were always drawn just enough to mute the sun. Everything looked immaculate. Gilded frames, antique sideboards, silence folded like napkins. But it didn't feel like home. It felt like a museum with beds. She sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through boxes labelled Windsor Archive and Tartan Inventory. You reached into one and pulled out a taxidermy hedgehog. She laughed so hard she spilled tea on the parquet. "That one's from Balmoral," she said. "They use it to teach kids about the natural world. Apparently the natural world is mostly dead." But the humour, as always, came with a shadow. It didn't take long to see how quickly the walls around her were closing in. After the wedding, she was assigned a team, a dresser, a hair specialist, a royal press officer who spoke in calendar slots. They didn't ask what she wanted. They asked for statements, appearances, angles. Turn a bit more to the left. Your tiara catches the light better that way. She told you the palace had a timetable for everything. Meals, press calls, expressions. There were entire briefings on how to exit a car. One morning you watched her rehearse a curtsy with a woman who'd been training duchesses since the war. Again, the woman said. Back straight, not too deep. You're royal, not reverent. By the 6th time, Diana muttered, I'm not sure who I'm bowing to anymore. The Queen or the weight of expectation. You both escaped to Hyde Park that afternoon. She wore sunglasses and a hoodie. You brought crisps and books. It was the only place she could read without someone asking if the pages matched protocol. Back at the palace, things grew stranger. Charles began vanishing, first for polo matches, then overseas tours, then for days at a time. When she asked where he'd gone, she was told, his schedule is his own. When she asked about the phone calls to Camilla, the reply was colder. That's not your concern. She didn't raise her voice. She wrote letters. She sent notes to aides asking for clarification on appearances or gentle suggestions for causes she might support. Many went unanswered. Some returned edited, her handwriting replaced with neatly typed lines. Once she sent a suggestion to attend a hospice opening. The response, not advisable, too soon for sentiment. That night she sat beside you in the garden, wrapped in a cardigan that once belonged to her father. I feel like a candle they forgot to light, she said. Everyone keeps polishing the holder, but no one sees if the wick is burning. You wanted to yell, wanted to march into that palace and shake the portraits off the walls, but instead you sat with her, listened, because no one else was. The public still adored her. Outside, crowds gathered whenever she appeared. They brought roses, teddy bears, paintings. Children cried her name. Teenagers skipped school just to glimpse her wave. To the world she was a dream come true. Inside she was too tall for tradition and too warm for their ice. She asked too many questions. She made too many jokes. She hugged children instead of shaking hands. She gave eye contact instead of empty smiles. And worst of all, she felt. She wasn't cold enough, not palace enough. One afternoon she told you about a dinner she had with the Queen. How was it, you asked? She thought for a second. Like eating a perfectly plated silence. She didn't mock the Queen, never would. But she felt the gap. Between generations, between duties, between what was said and what was meant. The palace had rules, unwritten ones. Don't speak first unless spoken to. Don't show too much emotion. Don't choose your own charities without approval. Don't change the rota. Don't be too loud. Don't be too kind. Don't be too anything. So she smiled, she waved, she curtsied. She played the part, until it stopped feeling like a role and more like a mask she couldn't take off. At night she'd call you, say things like, I think the furniture has more freedom than I do, or, do you think I'll still be me in 5 years? You told her yes, but you didn't believe it. Not yet. The palace taught her how to walk like a Windsor, but not how to stay herself. And no one noticed. Not until she started shrinking inside her own frame. Not until the girl with the balcony smile began to disappear behind the lace and protocol. One night, you brought her favourite cake, chocolate biscuit with too much cream, and found her sitting in a bathroom with the lights off. I just needed a place where no one is watching, she said. Then she looked at you and whispered, Do you think anyone would notice if I ran away? You didn't know what to say, so you passed her the cake and sat on the cold tile floor. Two friends, One Palace and a Growing Storm. Chapter 4, Cameras and Cradles, 1982 to 1984, Prince William's birth, press frenzy, and early motherhood. The first contraction came during a state dinner. Of course it did. She was in heels, corseted, seated beside a foreign dignitary who smelled like expensive ashtrays. You were home, watching the same dinner on television, when the camera caught her expression shift, just for a second, before the screen cut to another smiling diplomat. Later that night, the palace issued a vague press release. Her Royal Highness has retired early due to fatigue. What they meant was, she was in labour. You met her at the hospital the next morning. The press had already gathered like vultures dressed in raincoats. Cameras lined the pavement. Reporters rehearsed their royal baby voiceovers into microphones. Someone tried to sell souvenir mugs before she'd even reached the delivery ward. Inside, St. Mary's Hospital was calmer, sterile, pale walls and softer lights. But even there, she looked like she was performing. Hairbrushed, pearl earrings, makeup just enough to say, composure. You squeezed her hand. You look like a Vogue cover trying to give birth. She managed a smirk. Let's hope he doesn't inherit the Windsor ears. The nurses were kind, the doctors competent. But the moment didn't belong to her, not entirely. A royal birth was a national event, a public milestone with a private price. She was a vessel, a symbol, a headline before she was even stitched up. But when William arrived, rosy, squirming, loud, everything stopped. She didn't look at the camera. She didn't pose. She looked at him. And in that moment, the entire world faded. You saw it. The way her shoulders dropped. The way her breath slowed. As if, finally, her heart had found something worth beating for without fear. She named him William Arthur Philip Louis. William, she whispered, because he already sounds like someone you'd want to protect. 2 days later, she walked out of the hospital holding him in her arms, Charles beside her, photogenic and crisp. But all eyes were on her. The blue polka dot dress, the way she clutched her newborn so tightly you could almost hear her say, "He's mine, not yours, not the palace's, not the public's." That moment became iconic. Every photo from that day ended up on posters, tea towels and front pages, but you saw what the cameras missed. The way her hand trembled slightly as the crowd roared. The tiny crease in her brow, not from pain, but from the weight of knowing that even this, even motherhood, would never fully belong to her. Back at the palace, the nursery was already decorated, designer cribs, sterling silver rattles, a nanny staff prepared in rotating shifts. But Diana had other plans. She kicked off her heels, tied her hair back, and held her baby through the night herself. Everyone keeps handing him off like a handbag, she told you, but he's not a prop. He's my son. She breastfed. She changed nappies. She insisted on taking William with her on royal tours, which had never been done before. Courtiers balked. Unprecedented, they sniffed. She's disrupting the rota. She's too attached. She ignored them. When they travelled to Australia in 1983, Diana refused to leave William behind in the UK. Aides protested. Royal tradition dictated that heirs travel apart from parents, just in case. She calmly replied, "I didn't give birth to him so I could wave at his photo across the ocean." She brought him anyway, cradled him through customs, tucked him into hotel bassinets, kissed him between state dinners, and the people loved her even more. They cheered not just for the princess, but for the mother who dared to be human. Meanwhile, the press frenzy grew. Reporters tracked her every move. Tabloids ran headlines about her baby weight. One paper published a close-up of her pushing a pram captioned, "Still royal, even in trainers." She laughed at that one. "Shall I start wearing a tiara to the grocery store?" she quipped. But not all coverage was funny. They printed false stories about postpartum depression, about feuds with the Queen, about imagined tantrums in the nursery. It didn't matter if it was true, it just had to sell, and she felt it. The cracks beginning to show, not in her love for William, but in everything else. Charles drifted. His visits to the nursery became shorter, more formal. He'd hold the baby, smile for the camera, then disappear into the next engagement or hunting weekend. She once joked, "He thinks children are like paintings. You admire them from a distance." You saw her heartbreak. He was there, physically. But the connection frayed. He spoke more about duty than delight, more about succession than affection. Meanwhile, Diana blossomed in motherhood. She took William to theme parks, to hospitals, to community centres where he watched her kneel down to speak eye to eye with children no one else visited. "He'll learn more from that than from all the prep schools in England," she said. But behind closed doors her exhaustion grew. The pressure, the scrutiny, the loneliness. You'd come over some afternoons and find her asleep on the floor next to William's cot, one arm still draped protectively over him. She'd wake up, smile, and say, "Don't tell the palace. They'll accuse me of being maternal without clearance." By 1984, she was pregnant again. This time, she barely told anyone. She whispered it to you in the garden. "I want William to have someone else who knows what it's like to grow up here. Someone who speaks his language when the rest of the palace speaks protocol." Harry arrived that September. She loved him instantly, called him "my cheeky soul." And if William was her anchor, Harry became her spark. But the cracks had widened. By then she knew what she was up against. Not just Charles, not just the monarchy, but a whole machine built to filter her humanity through a lens of tradition. So she found her power in the one place no one could control. The nursery, the school run, the bedtime stories, the kisses in public, the refusal to hide her sons from the world. She didn't need a throne. She needed a lap for them to sit on. She needed them to know love didn't have titles. Just warmth, just presence, and in doing so, she rewrote what it meant to be royal, not with speeches, not with policy, but with lullabies and muddy sneakers and laughter behind closed doors. Chapter 5. Her Quiet Revolt. 1985 to 1987. AIDS crisis, tabloid wars and strategic kindness. It started with gloves. The kind she was expected to wear. Ivory satin, wrist length, part of the uniform. One evening she turned to you and said, "If I'm going to touch people, I want to feel them." She stopped wearing them on hospital visits after that, and for the record, no one asked her to. They only asked that she smile, wave, and stay in frame. But Diana was beginning to understand something vital, that her touch mattered. That compassion could be louder than protocol. The shift was subtle at first. A longer pause during charity events. A kiss on the cheek for a grieving mother. A moment on the floor with a child in hospice. But it grew. So did the press coverage. The palace didn't quite know what to make of it. She was no longer just the princess in the powder blue suit. She was becoming something else. Uncontrollable. In 1987 she visited the Middlesex Hospital, an AIDS ward, at a time when fear was stronger than fact. when people still believed the illness spread by touch. She walked in wearing a cream jacket and no gloves. She sat beside a man whose family had abandoned him. She held his hand, smiled, listened, cameras captured it, and the world shifted. That image, her fingers intertwined with his, sparked conversations across continents. It did what policies couldn't. It changed perception, not by decree, but by example. The palace, of course, panicked. She was told she'd undermined precedent. She was too emotional. One aide warned she might blur the lines between empathy and duty. She laughed and said, "Good. Maybe it's the lines that need changing." You met her later that week at her favourite cafe, a tiny place in Chelsea where the barista knew her order before she sat down. She wore sunglasses and no makeup, still glowing, still quietly dangerous in the way kindness always is. "I think I'm learning how to use this spotlight," she told you. "Not to warm myself, but to shine on what matters." But every step forward came with backlash. Tabloids turned sharper. They printed stories about feuds with staff, invented tantrums, fabricated quotes. She was called everything dash. Difficult, emotional, rebellious. They accused her of seeking attention. She wasn't. She was seeking dignity for others. You asked her once how she handled it. She said, "I've stopped reading. If it's true, I already know. If it's false, it doesn't deserve my time." But it still hurt, especially when it wasn't just about her. When they began targeting her sons, paparazzi camped outside schools. Long lenses followed school runs. One tabloid published photos of William in his uniform mid-yawn, as if he were a scandal. She fought back where she could. Letters to editors, appeals through palace lawyers. But mostly, she fought by being present, by shielding her boys not just with security, but with love so loud it echoed past the headlines. At home, she was beginning to redesign her life. She turned parts of Kensington Palace into something softer, a refuge. There were beanbags, toys, loud laughter, Michael Jackson posters. The staff adapted or left. The ones who stayed learned to navigate both the official protocols and the spontaneous dance parties. Yes, sometimes the boys wore mismatched socks. Yes, sometimes there were chocolate stains on antique rugs. But there was warmth. There was life. Charles, meanwhile, withdrew further. Their marriage had become a photo opportunity. Smiles on balcony steps, then silence in separate wings. The Camilla rumours, once whispered, now hummed in the background like a faulty wire. She told you one night over tea, "It's like living with an echo. I speak, and all I hear back is tradition." Still she carried on. Ballet galas, charity dinners, hospital visits, all with grace, all with a glint of quiet defiance. But you knew the weight she carried. There were nights she barely slept, nights when the headlines screamed louder than lullabies, when duty felt like a cage lined with velvet. And yet, she never let it harden her. If anything, she became more tender. You saw it in the way she took her time with people, the way she learned their names, their stories, how she made each person feel like the most important soul in the room. She once told you, "I think people are starved for softness. I want to give them a feast." She began writing more, journals, letters, thoughts that never made it to speeches. She kept them tucked in drawers and under pillows, pages of doubts, of dreams, of who she might be if she ever got to choose. And the world kept watching, adoring her, misunderstanding her, projecting onto her. But Diana, She was no longer just reacting, she was rewriting not the crown, not the rules, but herself. Her quiet revolt didn't come with banners, it came with bandaged hands, with unexpected hugs, with showing up again and again, and behind closed doors. She whispered to you, "I'm not trying to be rebellious, I'm just trying to be real, and if that threatens the structure, maybe the structure needs to be threatened." Chapter 6. Shattered Glass at Kensington. The walls of Kensington Palace weren't just stone and history. They were echo chambers. Echoes of what wasn't said. Of glances that missed. Of doors that closed more often than they opened. It had started as a fairy tale address. The kind scribbled on envelopes by schoolgirls dreaming of tiaras. But now it felt like a sealed box, too quiet, too golden, too sad. And inside it Diana began to splinter. The day Charles went on television, everything tilted. It was 1994 and the programme was supposed to be about his life, his role. A harmless PR portrait. But then came the question. The one about Camilla. Did he love her? Had he been faithful? He paused, just long enough to answer the world. Yes, he said, until it became irretrievably broken. Diana had been told it wouldn't happen, that this interview would be polished, safe. But she knew that word, irretrievably. It had weight. It was the kind of word that slammed shut centuries-old gates. She was upstairs when it aired. You were with her, on the edge of a velvet settee, one leg folded beneath you, the other bouncing like it could shake off the nerves. Neither of you breathed during the segment. You could hear the clock in the corridor tick. And then it was over. Diana stood, straightened her sweater, and said nothing for 10 full minutes. That night the mirror cracked. She didn't scream, didn't throw things. She stared at her reflection and gently took off her necklace. Each pearl clinked against the dressing table like a countdown. She had once believed she could fix it. That charm could outshine betrayal. That if she waved enough, smiled enough, looked radiant enough, he might remember how it once was. But fairy tales don't hold up in real light. And Diana was tired of acting like the castle was still hers. After Charles's admission, everything sped up. The palace held urgent meetings behind tapestries. Advisors whispered about timing, about reputational optics, as if love had a calendar. The Queen herself suggested a trial separation. Not a divorce, heavens no, but a dignified arrangement. For the sake of the boys, they said. And so Diana stayed in Kensington. A palace, yes, but not a home. More like a museum she occasionally moved through. You began noticing the changes. The quiet retreats into her study. The candles burning in the middle of the day. Books left open to chapters about healing and transformation. She had therapists now. Multiple. And she was reading Jung, writing poems, short ones, scribbled on hotel stationery or napkins. Not all cages have locks, one read. Some are made of glances. She let her public mask slip just a little, enough to show the outline of her sadness. She stopped attending certain royal events, skipped Balmoral, skipped the stiff dinners where the laughter came in rehearsed bursts and every woman was expected to compliment the salmon. Instead, she began crafting her own calendar, filled with hospital visits, school tours, late-night charity calls. You once caught her fixing her own heels with glue before heading out to a cancer ward. "They won't notice," she'd said, "but I'll walk better if I believe they will." Then came the Martin Bashir interview, the one she didn't tell you about until the day before. "I need to say it," she said, sitting on the carpet barefoot, hair tucked behind one ear. "They've said enough." You didn't argue. You knew better. She looked straight into the lens that day. And with the quiet resolve of a woman who had nothing left to lose, she told the world what it had whispered for years. "There were 3 of us in this marriage," she said, "so it was a bit crowded." The words landed like thunder, not because they were loud, but because they were true. A truth polished and poised in a voice that never cracked. After that, there was no more pretending. Papers called it explosive. Advisors called it catastrophic. But the public? They called it brave. Women stopped her on the street. Mothers, teachers, nannies with buggies. They thanked her for speaking what they'd lived in their own silent homes. And Diana? She softened. Not in sadness, but in the shedding. She wore fewer hats, fewer smiles without meaning, more trousers, more navy, more bold eyeliner, as if to say, "I see everything now." You once found her crying in the pantry, not the grand one where chefs made pheasant terrines, the small one near the staff hallway. She was sitting on a stool holding a photo of the boys. "They're going to be fine," she whispered, "but I don't want them to think this is what love looks like." You sat beside her, your knees bumping. The room smelled like biscuits and steel polish. And for 20 minutes you just listened to the kind of sobs that only come after years of restraint. She filed for divorce in 1996. The terms were negotiated like treaties. Titles were shifted, staff reassigned. Money debated behind oak doors. She lost the title Her Royal Highness, but gained something she couldn't name. "It's not freedom," she told you. "Not yet. But it's closer to the air." That year the palace gates felt different. The guards nodded more gently. The public peered in not with awe, but with affection. She walked faster now, not in haste, but with purpose. Like every step away from the palace was a step toward herself. You noticed it first when she laughed again, not the practiced photo-op laugh, but the deep, ridiculous kind that makes your cheeks hurt. It happened when you burned toast in her flat and set off the alarm. She covered her ears, shrieked, then laughed so hard she slid down the kitchen cabinets breathless. That night, she said, "Maybe I was never meant to be a queen. Maybe I was meant to burn toast and be adored anyway." There were still headlines, still flashbulbs, but the light no longer blinded her. She started making lists. "Things I Like," one was titled. It included laughing too loud, coffee ice cream, walking barefoot in wet grass, and the way people look when they forget anyone's watching. It included laughing too loud, coffee ice cream, walking barefoot in wet grass, and the way people look when they forget anyone's watching. And at the bottom, in tiny careful print, "Myself, in progress." That was the year you realized something. She hadn't broken. She had shed. Shattered glass doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it just means sunlight has more ways in. And Diana, barefoot in the corridor of a palace she no longer needed, was finally beginning to let it shine. Chapter 7. The People's Princess. She didn't plan to become a symbol. That was never the goal. But when the titles faded and the tiaras went back into velvet boxes, something else emerged. Something quieter, stronger, more human. It started with a flight. Angola, 1997. You were seated beside her, knees knocking slightly as the plane bumped through warm African clouds. She wore jeans, no security detail, no press, at least not officially. Just a quiet mission to walk through a country the rest of the world barely glanced at. "Do you think I'll look ridiculous?" she asked, eyes scanning the horizon. "Tiptoeing through landmines in borrowed boots?" You said no, and meant it. She laughed. That particular Diana laugh, half defiant, half terrified. "Good, because I'm not going home until they notice." The next day she stepped into the red dust with a bulletproof vest strapped over her blouse. Her walk was measured, precise. One foot in front of the other, along a taped path, through an active minefield that had once swallowed children whole. She bent down once to tie her laces, and when she rose the camera caught it, a glimpse of determination so raw it silenced headlines. The photo circled the globe within hours. Diana, in dust and denim, walking straight into danger for people she'd never met. That image, more than any ball gown, became the picture the world chose to remember. The headlines changed. Not all of them, but enough. She wasn't the waif princess anymore. She was becoming something else. A kind of lighthouse. You saw it first in the airport lounges, when staff whispered thank yous as she passed. Or the mother who rushed forward with a photo of her sick child, asking if Diana could help. And she did. Every time. She stopped attending garden parties. Instead, she visited HIV clinics. Held hands no one else would. Sat on hospice beds until the machine stopped blinking. One day, you found her in her Kensington flat. Not in heels, but socks, sitting cross-legged on the floor, handwriting letters. "To the parents," she explained. "Sometimes grief just needs to know it was seen." People began calling her the People's Princess. At first it embarrassed her. "Sounds like a toothpaste ad," she joked, but she kept the cards. Everyone that used the phrase. They lined the drawer beside her bed, stacked like fragile bricks building something new. In public she was Grace. In private she was learning how to be loved differently. There was Hasnat, the quiet heart surgeon from Pakistan. That chapter was brief, tender, and mostly unspoken. "He liked me when I looked tired," she said once. That felt revolutionary. But the world wasn't kind to quiet love. And so, when it faded, she turned outward again, toward a purpose bigger than herself. By then, her diary was filled with plans, outlines for charities, a proposal for a foundation, speaking invitations from Geneva to Johannesburg. One entry read, "What if kindness was louder than power?" She didn't tell many people about her therapy sessions, but she never missed one. "Even queens need someone to ask how their heart is," she'd say, eyes twinkling. In July 1997, she vacationed in the south of France. The papers exploded. Sunbathing, yachts, a new companion, Dodi Al-Fayed. "Let them print what they want," she told you, tan lines barely fading. "I'm not running anymore." Dodi was kind, funny, protective in a way Diana hadn't known before. He made her laugh, made her feel seen without being managed. He booked out whole restaurants just to have privacy. She'd sit cross-legged in a caftan, sipping wine, smiling like it was all a little absurd. "Maybe," she whispered to you once, "this could be the next chapter." But even then her heart was cautious. Love had never arrived without noise. There were plans for September. A speech in New York. a charity dinner in Milan, more visits with the Halo Trust and UNICEF. But first, one more weekend in Paris. You remember the phone call. August 30th. Late. Diana's voice was soft, unguarded. "They're chasing us again," she sighed. "Honestly, I don't think they ever stop." You asked if she was scared. "No," she said, "just tired, but happy. For once, truly." That was the last time you heard her voice. The next morning the world broke. It began with whispers, then radio alerts, then the unbearable truth. A car crash, a tunnel, Paris, midnight. You dropped the phone, fell to your knees, and the silence that followed felt like the whole planet forgot how to breathe. But this is not a chapter about how she died. This is about what she lived. In the weeks after, the streets outside Kensington became oceans of flowers. Mourners came in waves, grandmothers and toddlers, nurses, tourists, night shift workers, all carrying something, a daisy, a candle, a note. You walked those streets in a daze. People stopped you. "You knew her?" they'd ask, hands trembling. You nodded. And every story they told felt like a bead on a rosary of remembrance. "She held my baby. She wrote my daughter back. She looked me in the eye when no one else would." At the funeral, 2.5 billion people tuned in. The cameras rolled, but the tears were real. Elton sang. William and Harry walked behind her casket, their shoulders too young to carry that weight. And you stood by the gate, hands in fists, watching as the woman the world called a princess was laid to rest by her brother's words. She needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic, he said. And no one disagreed. In the days that followed, a quiet revolution began. More funding poured into the landmine treaty movement. By December, 122 nations had signed the Ottawa Treaty. It banned the very mines Diana had walked through just months before. HIV stigma shifted. Patients reported that being held by her had made them feel human again, and charities across the globe saw surges in donations, often with small notes, "in her memory." You returned to Kensington one final time, to pack up what she'd left behind, a drawer full of postcards, a sandal with a cracked sole, her favourite cassette tape, George Michael, worn thin, and inside a notebook titled Someday, a single line written in ink that had slightly smudged. "Love doesn't need a palace, just room to breathe." That was Diana, not a crown, not a headline, just a girl who learned to walk through minefields, both literal and emotional, and left flowers behind instead of footsteps. The world didn't just mourn her. It remembered how she made it feel. Chapter 8. Pages she never published. You found her in the window seat again. Feet tucked under a blanket, pen between her teeth, diary open. It was always the same spot, just wide enough to watch the garden fade into dusk, just private enough for confessions. She didn't write like royalty. She scribbled. Arrows, loops, words, scratched out like they'd hurt to even spell. But her pages were a kind of rebellion. A place where no press could twist her voice, no institution could edit her thoughts. "I write it all down," she told you once, glancing up. "Otherwise it just clatters around in here." She tapped her temple. "And there's enough noise in there as it is." The sessions with her therapist had started quietly. No fanfare, no headlines. Just a woman looking for someone who wouldn't call her Your Royal Highness, before asking how she felt. She'd go twice a week. Sit cross-legged, no makeup, sleeves rolled. She didn't need diagnoses. She needed space. A place to unravel the tangle of duty and doubt. "I talk too much," she admitted once, laughing. "But then again, I've been told to stay silent for so long it feels like a flood every time I open my mouth." You never saw her more at peace than after those sessions. She'd come home and pour tea, then go straight to her notebook. Sometimes just a word. Sometimes 5 pages, fast and breathless. One entry read, "Today I cried over a woman I never met. Just a name on a file, but her pain sounded like mine. Maybe grief is just the echo of empathy." She dreamed of publishing one day. Not a memoir, that felt like another press trap, but something small. A children's book, perhaps. She loved the idea of a girl finding courage in an unexpected place. "She'd live in a greenhouse," Diana whispered once, eyes lighting up. "Full of weeds everyone else hated, but she'd love them, name them, and one day they'd grow taller than the palace walls." You smiled and she grinned. Too sentimental? Never. Not for her. There were other notebooks. Stashed in back of drawers, behind spare tiaras, inside old photo albums. They weren't organised, just scattered glimpses of her mind. Fragments. One was filled entirely with first lines. "I woke up and remembered I didn't belong to anyone today. They told me love was duty, but no one warned me about the silence. Sometimes I think I was born with my heart outside my body." She never finished most of them. That wasn't the point. She wrote speeches by hand. Every underline was intentional. Every pause rehearsed like a whisper into a wound. Before the 1993 address on eating disorders, she had stayed up all night, reading, editing, shaking her head. "They want me to soften it," she said, waving a marked-up draft. "But young girls are dying to be accepted. What's the point of a princess if she can't protect them?" She stood in front of the mirror and read it aloud to you, hand trembling slightly. "Every one of us needs to show how much we care for each other, and in the process, care for ourselves." She paused. "Do you think they'll hear that?" You did. And so did the world. The Panorama interview loomed like a storm cloud. Martin Bashir's pitch had been clever, promising honesty, control, her voice unfiltered. But in the weeks before, she couldn't sleep. Her diary entries got sharper, anxious. "What if I open the door and never get to close it again?" You asked if she was sure. "I'm sure I need to be heard," she said, "even if the echo's cruel." The night before the interview aired, she read you something she hadn't shown anyone else. A short monologue, folded like a letter. "If I disappear beneath their headlines, remember this. I was never just their princess. I was my own woman. I laughed too loudly, loved too deeply, and broke too publicly. But I never once stopped trying." She folded it again, placed it under her teacup. "Not for air," she said, "just for me." Years later, the world would learn the interview had been built on deceit, false documents, pressure. An illusion of safety turned trap, but at the time, she didn't know. She only knew the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths, and a microphone that, finally, didn't interrupt. When the segment aired, she didn't blink. "There were 3 of us in this marriage," she said, "so it was a bit crowded." It wasn't a line. It was a wound spoken aloud. After the fallout, she barely left Kensington for days. Not out of shame, but exhaustion. The relief of finally telling the truth was tangled with grief over how it landed. You brought her Chinese takeaway and a new journal. The cover was soft green. Too hopeful, you asked? She smiled. Hope's not the problem. It's expectation that bruises. By 1996, she was writing again. Every night. Between charity events and quiet dinners, she'd sit in bed with her legs tucked under a wool blanket, pen in hand. Some pages were about William and Harry. Others were letters she never sent. To Camilla, to Charles, even to her younger self. You'll want to be liked. Don't trade yourself for their applause. Kindness isn't weakness. It's a choice they'll try to beat out of you. Fall in love but never disappear inside someone else. She showed you a story once, handwritten across 20 pages of hotel stationery. It followed a girl who lived among mirrors. Everyone told her how she looked. No one asked how she felt. Until one day she covered every mirror and listened to her own voice echo. At the end, the girl walks into a crowded room, unseen but smiling. She's free, Diana said, tapping the page. She doesn't need them to see her anymore. You asked if she'd ever finish it. I think I already have, she said. Her last summer, you found a small envelope tucked inside her latest notebook. It wasn't addressed. Inside was a single page. If I leave anything behind, let it be this, that a girl can be both soft and unbreakable, that she can survive being misunderstood and still choose love, that even when her story is stolen, she still owns the ending. You folded it back carefully. The handwriting was rushed, almost urgent. Maybe she didn't know time was running short. Maybe she did. Not everything she wrote was poetic. Some pages were furious, ranting about paparazzi, court dates, leaked stories. Some were mundane, grocery lists, dinner menus, notes to the housekeeper. But it all mattered. Because it was hers, not ghostwritten, not approved by courtiers, not shaped for camera angles, just Diana in her own ink. Years later, when her journals were archived for safekeeping, you asked if the world would ever read them. Maybe one day, the curator said, but only if they're ready to listen. You hoped they would be. Until then, you remember her like this. Socks mismatched, hair pulled back, a smear of ink on her cheek from leaning into the page, laughing at her own bad metaphors, reading you a line with her whole heart, then tearing it out saying, no, that one's just for me. She didn't need to publish to be heard. She just needed to be believed. Chapter 9. A different kind of love story. It wasn't planned. Nothing about that summer was. Not the trip, not the company, and certainly not the way she looked at him. You could tell something was different when she returned from the south of France. The usual bags of duty and regret were missing. Instead, she carried a sun hat, a half smile and a single Polaroid. Diana laughing with her head tilted back, the sea behind her like silk. That was the first day I forgot I was being watched, she said, slipping the photo into your hand. It only lasted 7 minutes, but still. His name was Dodi Al-Fayed, film producer, heir, mystery. The tabloids called him many things, but Diana called him unexpected. He had shown up like an accidental page in a love story she never meant to write. Wealthy, reserved, awkward in the best way. He's nervous around me, she whispered once. Isn't that funny? After all these years, I finally meet a man who doesn't try to fix me or tame me or parade me. He just passes the sugar. There were gifts, of course. Gold bangles, letters folded 3 times, a tiny painting of a lighthouse she once pointed at from the yacht. But she didn't talk about the diamonds. She talked about the dinners. They would eat on the deck, barefoot, sharing olives and secrets. He told me he had night terrors as a boy, she said one night. Imagine that. A man like him still waking up from old ghosts. She admired that. That he told her something fragile. It had been a long time since anyone had. They kissed like people who weren't sure they deserved it. Like the clock was ticking louder than they let on. And yet, even then, she held back a piece of herself. I don't know if it's love, she admitted to you over the phone. But it's not fear. And for me, that's rare. Paris was supposed to be a quick stop. A hotel suite. A private dinner. A ring, maybe. The papers would spin it later into a planned proposal. Truth is, she never confirmed that. What she said was, I think he sees me. Not the headline, not the symbol, just me. Messy, complicated, too much me. And he still shows up. That last week she called you from the car, traffic humming behind her. Did you know, she said, that I've been chased through 5 countries this summer? I don't even know what they want pictures of anymore. My kneecaps, my iced tea. You could hear her trying to laugh, but there was a weight to it, a practiced weariness. They don't want a picture. They want the last word. There were moments that felt ordinary. Her brushing her teeth while humming a song. Him trying to open a jar of fig jam with a towel and failing. You saw a photo once, never published, of the two of them sitting in hotel robes on the floor, backs against the bed, surrounded by half-eaten room service. She was resting her head on his shoulder. He was pointing at something in a book. They weren't smiling for a camera. They were smiling at something real, and yet the noise never let up. Helicopters, flashbulbs, false stories about jealousy, rings, resentment. A media circus more frenzied than ever. You asked if she was afraid. I'm not afraid of love, she said. I'm afraid of being caught loving. There's a difference. There was a letter she never sent. You found it weeks later, tucked into a travel journal. It read, I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but if we get to sit in silence and call it peace, I'll take it. I've had enough fireworks. I just want to hold someone's hand and not have to explain why. She was still writing her heart out, still believing even then that soft could still mean strong. August 30th was the last time you heard her voice. A voicemail, short, rushed. Hey, it's me. Paris is Paris. I bought you a scarf. Remind me to tell you about the cheese tray disaster. Love you. You kept that message, even when the world fell silent. The final night was all noise. Cameras, scooters, shouts in a dozen languages, the Ritz, the Mercedes, the tunnel, and then nothing. In the hours that followed, the world tried to reconstruct a love story out of headlines. But they missed the small things. The way he buttoned her coat when she forgot. The way she saved his voicemails like tiny souvenirs. The way they both believed they had time. People still debate whether it was true love, whether it was impulsive, whether it would have lasted. But she once told you this. Maybe love isn't about longevity. Maybe it's about softness, about being safe in someone else's silence. And in that final summer, she had a few soft days, a few safe hours, a few pages in a story she never thought she'd get to live. Not the whole book, but enough to underline, She wasn't rescued. She wasn't reborn. She was just her fully, finally. Chapter 10. The night the world stopped. It was late. The kind of late where the city blinks slower and even the traffic lights seem unsure of themselves. Paris glowed in that muted golden way it does when the rain holds off just long enough for something to go wrong. Diana had dinner that night. Quiet, understated. She wore black, with her hair pulled back just enough to reveal the soft curve of her neck. Dodie sat across from her, toying with a spoon, distracted. They had argued earlier, something about security or press routes, or maybe just fear wearing a different face. You weren't there. But you'd spoken to her just hours before. Her voice was light, almost joking. "They're camping outside the hotel again," she said. "If I smile at them, it's a story. If I don't, it's a scandal. Either way, they win." At 12:23 a.m., the Mercedes pulled away from the Ritz. Henri Paul at the wheel, Dodie beside him, Diana in the back. A bodyguard too. It wasn't supposed to be that car. It wasn't supposed to be that route. But nothing about that night was supposed to happen. The Pont de l'Alma tunnel waits like a throat in the dark. They entered fast. Too fast. Chased by cameras, light exploding in every mirror. And then silence. A sickening, brutal silence. You were asleep when the first call came. You didn't answer. You didn't need to. Somehow your body already knew. You woke cold. Empty. The news broke like glass on tile. A BBC anchor's voice suddenly softer. Radios across the globe shifting from late-night jazz to stunned quiet. Diana, Princess of Wales, has died. No sirens. No gunshots. No speeches. Just a tunnel and a stopped heart. In London, the city held its breath. A cab driver pulled over on the side of the road and wept. In Sydney, a mother woke her daughter to light a candle. In Johannesburg, a priest changed his sermon mid-sentence. The world didn't end. But it tilted. You couldn't cry at first. Not because you didn't feel it, but because it didn't feel real. You turned on the TV, the radio, flipped channels. Same headline, different anchors. Everyone blinking too much, as if that could undo it. You sat with your knees pulled up to your chest, staring at the phone, waiting for someone to say it wasn't true, that she was just hiding, that she'd call any minute laughing, but there was no call. Only flowers. They came by the thousands, then millions. Buckingham Palace was swallowed by colour. Roses, lilies, scribbled notes on soaked cards, stuffed bears, poems written in childish hands. We miss you. We love you. You are ours. The gates disappeared. The city blurred. You walked to Kensington Palace the next morning. The silence of the crowd was louder than any anthem. Strangers held hands without knowing why. A man in a business suit knelt to light a candle. A teenage girl left her Walkman playing Candle in the Wind. You stood there, hours maybe. Time didn't work the same. The royal family was silent at first. The protocol machine sputtered. Flags remained high. Statements came late. People grew angry, but the people didn't wait for permission to grieve. They already had. On sidewalks, in supermarkets, at school assemblies, Diana belonged to them, and they knew how to say goodbye. 5 days later, Elton sang. Not the song they'd rehearsed, but the one she deserved. Goodbye, England's Rose. 2.5 billion people watched, the largest broadcast audience the world had seen. More than the moon landing, more than the Olympics, more than her wedding. You watched alone, a pillow clutched to your chest, mouthing the words as tears finally came. Not sobs, not hysterics. Just the kind that sneak past you, like mist, until you realize you're soaked. The coffin was simple, draped in the royal standard, topped with white lilies. A single envelope rested on top. One word written in a child's handwriting, Mummy. You never forgot that. That one word, so small, carrying more weight than the speeches of kings. They buried her on an island. A quiet place in Althorpe, surrounded by trees, a small lake, and the wind. No street signs, no motorcades, just space, peace. Finally, you sent a letter, folded it into an envelope with a pressed hydrangea from her favourite florist. You never got a reply, but you never expected one. That night you dreamed of her, standing in that greenhouse again, humming, bare feet on damp soil. "Do you think they'll remember?" she asked. You nodded. "Good," she said. "Just not for the wrong things." And now, years later, they still come. To the gates, to the garden, to the documentaries and the wax figures and the charity fundraisers. They come not because she was royal, but because she was real, fragile, brave, funny. Too much in a world that demands less. That night, the world didn't stop. But for a moment it felt like the air around it did. And somewhere between the headlines and the hymns, a woman's voice still echoed, "I want to be a queen of people's hearts." She was. Chapter 11. The memory she left behind. Some people leave behind palaces. Diana left behind candles, thousands of them, flickering in windows, lining the gates, floating on lakes in cities she'd never stepped foot in. Nairobi, Toronto, Seoul, Lima, Reykjavik. You saw it firsthand. In the weeks that followed, light became the language people spoke. They couldn't find the words, so they lit matches. Tea lights, vigils, storefronts filled with photos surrounded by blooms and melted wax puddles. She had never been to most of these places. But somehow she was there anyway. A little boy in Brazil wore a crown made of newspaper and said he was marrying the nice princess in the sky. A graffiti wall in Berlin read, "She hugged people no one else would touch." In Los Angeles, a drag show raised thousands for AIDS research and ended with a toast to Diana, the fiercest queen who never needed a stage. She was everywhere and nowhere. You tried to move on, to fold her story gently into the drawer of your memory like an old scarf, soft, frayed at the edges, still carrying the smell of her perfume. But she didn't stay folded for long, because people wouldn't let her go. Every charity gala you attended, every hospital wing you toured in her honour, there she was, in whispers, in glances, in the way people stood taller when they said her name. The Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund carried her work forward. In the years after her passing, it helped shift policies around AIDS care, hospice support, and landmine education. She didn't live to see the 1997 Ottawa Treaty, the global ban on landmines signed just months after her Angola visit. But her fingerprints were all over it. And everyone knew. You visited Althorpe again, years later, long after the world had stopped watching. The island was quiet. Birds, wind, the occasional ripple across the lake. But someone had left a single yellow daffodil near the memorial stone, and a handwritten note that simply read, "Still missing you, still proud." A statue went up in Kensington Gardens, unveiled by her sons, surrounded by 3 children sculpted beside her, a symbol of all the lives she touched. It wasn't a grand statue, not by royal standards, but it didn't need to be, because the real memorials were scattered in hospital wards, refugee camps, bookshelves, in the nurse who hugs her patients tighter, in the teen who speaks up for someone being mocked, in the mother who lets her child cry in public without apology. Sometimes you'd catch sight of her in the strangest places, a woman on the tube reading a worn copy of A Voice for the Voiceless, a little girl in a plastic tiara sharing her birthday cake with someone sitting alone, a volunteer quietly spooning soup into trembling hands, whispering, "You matter." That was her. Still here, still working. You kept a box. Just one. Inside, a cassette tape of that Elton song, a charity pin from her last gala, a note she scribbled in the margin of a draft speech, "Too stiff, needs warmth," and a pressed gardenia. Her favourite. You never opened it often, but you liked knowing it was there, like she was just on the other side of the door, and the world kept changing. A new generation came along, born after the balcony waves and landmine walks, but somehow they knew her. Through documentaries, through magazine spreads, through TikToks and timelines, through mothers who whispered her name with reverence, through dads who still got misty at that funeral clip, through teachers who used her story to explain kindness in a cruel world. William became a father. Twice, then 3 times. You saw it in his eyes, the way he crouched low to meet children at their level, just like she had. When he named his daughter Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, the world exhaled. A small thing, a big thing, a quiet return of her name to the halls of history. Harry walked a different path, left titles behind, spoke out loud the things Diana had whispered. He stood where she had once stood, in Angola, tracing her steps. In his interviews, his activism, his grief, you saw her again, not in shadow, but in fire. They carried her differently. One became heir to the crown, the other rewrote the rules, but both still carried her fire. You once asked her what legacy meant to her. She'd paused, twirling a spoon between her fingers, then said, "I suppose I just want people to feel less alone when I leave." They did. And they do. Because the memory she left behind wasn't just a person. It was a permission to feel deeply, to speak softly, to break the rules if the rules hurt people, and that, more than bloodlines or ball gowns, was what made her unforgettable. Chapter 12. What 30 years with Diana taught me. It's strange how memory folds time. One moment, you're holding a fresh bouquet outside a palace gate. The next, you're older than you ever thought you'd be, staring at a lake in silence where everything began. 30 years. That's how long I carried her laughter in my pocket. Not like a weight, but like a song I hummed when the world was too loud. It's also how long I've tried to answer one impossible question. What did Diana teach me? She taught me that a title can open doors, but kindness walks through them. That you can be surrounded by crowds and still ache from loneliness. That being adored by the world doesn't mean you feel known. I think of the greenhouse sometimes. where her hands smelled like rosemary and soil, not perfume, where she once said, "I wish someone would water me like this." It was a joke, but not entirely. She was always giving. She rarely asked. She taught me that rebellion doesn't have to look like fire. Sometimes it looks like sitting beside a child with AIDS when no one else will, or dancing with a prosthetic-wearing soldier in Angola, just to remind the world that scars can still smile. She didn't overthrow the monarchy. She outgrew it. She didn't want the crown. She wanted freedom. And when she finally had it, she gave it away, one hug at a time. People often ask me what she was really like. Was she shy? Was she broken? Was she the saint they turned her into? The truth is she was human. Painfully, beautifully human. She cursed when she stubbed her toe. She couldn't resist chips at midnight. She danced like no one was watching, even when everyone was. And she loved like a faucet with no off switch, too much, too fast, and all at once. I watched her fall in love, and out of it. Watched her try to hold broken things together, even when she was the one bleeding, and I watched her laugh, that wide, wicked grin, even after the press called her names I won't repeat. She told me once, "If I'm going to be misunderstood, I might as well be unforgettable." That was Diana. She turned pain into presence, grief into grace. She taught me how to sit in the ache and not run from it. How to forgive people who weren't sorry. How to take up space, even when told to shrink. There was a moment, years after she passed, when I found myself standing at the edge of that same lake, the one where she once threw pebbles and dreams into the water. I brought lilies, not roses. She never liked roses. Too performative, she said. Too red. I knelt down, placed them gently in the shallows, and whispered something I hadn't said in years. Thank you. For what exactly? I'm still figuring that out. But I think it's for letting me see her. Not the princess. Not the tabloid cover. Just the girl in oversized sweaters trying to find her way. Sometimes I wonder what she'd make of the world now, of the way her sons walk it. One became heir to the crown. The other rewrote the rules. Both still carry her fire. You can see her in the way William crouches down to speak to children, in the way Harry flinches when the flashbulbs go off, then keeps walking anyway. She's in their silences too. The unspoken grief, the missing seat at every table. Her legacy isn't marble, it's motion, it's kindness. It's the quiet choices people make every day, because they saw her do it first. And as for me, well, I still keep her birthday on my calendar. Still talk to her sometimes when I'm driving. Still set out an extra glass of wine in July, just in case. I don't know what happens after this life, but I like to think if there's a heaven, Diana's not seated on a throne. She's barefoot in a garden, laughing, free. Maybe watching over someone who needs it, or maybe just dancing. She was never just a princess. She was someone's friend. And I was lucky so lucky to be that someone.